missed some good banter, but welcome back, everybody. This is Above Spirituality, episode 20-something again. My producers keep telling me to say that because I keep biffing on the numbers or over concerning myself with the numbers. Today, I am here with the one and only HoneyBee. She is a tantric practitioner and co-founder of Temple, a femme-empowered space for women's sacred sexuality. Bee, how are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. How are you doing today?
I am really good. I just had a great interview with Luke Lindstrom. Shout out, he's still in the audience. Shout out Rob, who's also here. Yeah, I'm doing really good. I'm very excited for the interview. And I just want to say, I adore your outfit. You look beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, white and
love
gold.
Your shirt. Very fun, playful.
I even got this little
chain. Yeah,
yes.
I love some chains.
I will say one of my favorite things about the podcast is I gotta pick my cute little outfits.
Aww,
so it's kind of fun.
Yes, it's always fun to play dress up.
Yes, you might want to put the mic just a little bit closer. Okay. But keep a good shot of your face and stuff. Well, I'm very excited to have you on the show today because today we were going to talk about Tantra and about sexuality and spirituality as just a form of embodiment and just the stuff that really embodies. I think, it would be funny if it wasn't so infuriating how sexuality is just such a taboo thing in classically spiritual circles.
And what if it wasn't?
I know. No, if it wasn't, we would be hopefully so much more free, so much more able to experience our life as a soul in a body. Obviously sexuality is not as important for everybody. Some people just don't have as much of the desire, whether that's from something mental or even just something physical. But obviously, that's a big part of your body experience.
Your sexual energy is your most potent and powerful energy and
yes.
is a big part of your being.
Yes. A lot of people say that the Kundalini itself is a sexual energy. I'm in this organization called the School of Metaphysics, and we do some light Kundalini practices. And we always talk about how Kundalini is divine creative energy. And it's the most potent form of energy known to mankind. But you're a Tantra practitioner. You probably know a lot more about this than me.
And your creative energy, where is that based? The same place that many practices and traditions, such as Tantra, believe and base our sexual energy to be based in. That root chakra, and the base of your spine for femmes, and our ovaries for men, and the testicles. In Taoist practice, there's this understanding or belief that as you develop in utero, there are two halves that make a whole. And there's this line. You can see, you've looked maybe in the back of your throat, or you've seen a pregnant woman's belly and you've seen that line, or you've seen it in your own scrotum or anything that. Your energy, that creative energy, or kundalini, in those practices, that serpent spirals up that same path that in Taoism, you have your microcosmic orbit, and your chi, your life force energy, follows up. How is it that these two separate practices, separated by space and time, have same concepts surrounding energy and experiences and the movement and place that we feel that in the body? It's a shared human experience.
Well, I think so much of spirituality is rooted in that, my belief is that all people are spiritual beings. There is, just to throw the G word out there, there's just one God, there's one divinity, and it just is found in different ways, but it's like you're looking at the same picture from a different angle. But yes, no, it's also interesting too with I don't know how related this is, but it's it just reminds me, you're talking about the in utero thing. Not a lot of people know this, but when a fetus is in utero and it's developing, everyone knows the little fish looking thing that we start out as physically. But what a lot of people don't know is that the reproductive organs of both men and women start off as the same tissues. And then the only thing that decides what genitals you have is whether it gets hit by a lot of testosterone or estrogen. And as I understand, that comes from, your chromosomes and whatnot. So it's like, it's really like how that creative energy touched your physical body and then formed it, So I don't know if that's like super related, but I just felt inspired to share it again.
Thank you for sharing. So you said something that I think sparked for me. So you shared your belief system under this one God concept. And so we're talking about sacred sexuality. We're talking about Tantra. I think going back and looking back in time and history just a little bit, because with Tantra is one of the few religions that didn't experience the same book burnings and scrubbing that a lot of other religions did surrounding sexuality. It's one of the few religions that just still maintained that in the texts that we continue to and information we have today. Tantra in Sanskrit means thread, this concept that we're all connected. And with that, so back in more ancient times, you had temple
in India, that would be right.
What?
Don't even worry about it. Just keep going. I interrupted your thought.
Yeah. What is like essentially now Israel?
Oh, okay.
What is now Israel? I just had to think because there's so many different terms that how that's kind of shifted over time. What is now Israel? You had the temple of Astara, which these were ancient temples where they would gather under the divine feminine, and they would convene with the Kadeshas and with the priestesses in there to convene with the goddesses, to convene and have conversations through sacred sexual practices. That mitzvah, that when a boy becomes a man, was often brought to these temples of Astara to have these connections with the priestesses. But then there was the temple of Yahweh, early Hebrew and monotheistic practices of this one God concept that you talk about. They wanted more power, political power, more land, and more followers. So how did they do that? By making slowly, over time, people come into their practices. So adapting a lot of, as it spread, adopting a lot of the pagans, whereas the common religion around, going to them, drawing them in, and then slowly over time, shaming sexuality, making sacred sexuality illegal, making things more about purity. And if you shut down sexuality, you shut down women's bodies, you can take a lot of power because women's sexuality has a lot of power to it. And over time, this has developed into what is our modern day Western kind of repression and shame surrounding sexuality. And modern day Tantra, as we were talking about it, is kind of bringing back these ancient rites and moving beyond what is now the status quo, reclaiming sexual power. It's its own form of renaissance.
That HoneyBee brings up like so many things that we talked a little bit about what we were going to talk about, and so I'm just going to make a decision on because it brings up so many points. I think the first thing I want to ask you, because I really want to ask you more about like, what is Tantra in an American sense, in a Western sense, and in a traditional sense. But before I do that, we might as well just dive straight in. So why do you think that, just like in like consciousness, you could say, why do you think that sexuality became one of the aspects of human life that became so repressed?
When you repress people's sexuality, you can control them better. You have better followers. Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you repress women's bodies, you have better followers. You have people who are less liberated in their yeses and their nos and their embodiment. When you shut down that powerful part of someone's energy, they become a better worker, a better follower, someone who will kind of submit to someone else taking leadership and doing what we continue to see in growing for someone else's gain and political power, land, money, and those sorts of concepts.
Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes I like shy away from thinking it was so intentional, but in some ways it's naive.
It's strategic. It's very strategic.
Oh, exactly. I mean, and people are, I mean, it's like, I get naive because I don't want to think that way, but no, I mean, people do shit like that. I also think that part of it, I think because the sexual energy is so powerful, and a sad thing with some sexual experience is that it can go wrong for people. It can, even in like well-intentioned ways, not to mention the gratuitous, and it can be so powerful and trigger things that maybe people weren't fully ready to feel. They didn't know how to feel.
And when you breed on that fear and that potential for hurt, you scare people off, they don't grow, and they just shut it out.
And it's interesting that you said when you even breed on that, because a lot of it, before, modern times, we take for granted that the sexual act was a lot less unlikely to make a baby, And so that I think that some of it too was that because of the amount of power of the act and how people could either take it the wrong way or would get in their own shame, which may have been, strategically placed there, that overall, like in consciousness, like unconsciously in the collective, it got linked to our sense of shame. And so then unconsciously we bought into the idea that like, hey, this is something, you got to say the least, be careful with. And in the way we neutered ourselves.
Yeah, and I mean, you can look at many tribes as well. Nowadays, there's a lot of focus on who's the dad. And in tribes, if the baby is crying, you pick up the baby. It doesn't matter whose baby it is. It doesn't matter whose kid it is. They're part of the community. And you take care of them and you pick them up. It doesn't matter who the father is. They're part of that community. And nowadays we have this family household that you have a mother, a father, a child, and it shuts people off from community and from that growth. And people are very isolated.
Now, God, you keep bringing us up big points. We will eventually get into like, what is Tantra and talking about that and like some of the stuff you're involved in. Just I'm so curious. But when you said earlier, that women's sexuality is so powerful. I mean, not to put it in a box, but obviously like one of the obvious ways is like, that is the vehicle of the propagation of the human race. Like we wouldn't have this conversation.
Women can make humans. That's pretty powerful.
It was so funny because I was talking to my sister, and this was a very male thought. I was having some lady problems. I was like, why is this girl being so reactive? And my sister just looked at me, she's like, Gino, I am the portal of human life into this dimension. Yeah, you better believe I'm going to be thinking about things, and I'm going to be like, reactive and stuff because I need to like make that happen. I need to facilitate that. And that just was a big change.
I'd also throw in there to take into consideration, due to a lot of this repression, there continues to propagate and persist a lot more harm that is caused from male repression. Yeah. And so most every woman that you come across and meet has been sexually harmed in one way or another, whether it's harassment, assault. And so take that in consideration and in softness with any woman that you meet, that just about every woman has been harmed.
No, it's we were talking about something similar on a different episode. We were talking about masculinity and spirituality and even just in our last interview about like the innocence of the child. And again, like I was saying, like because the sexual experience, it triggers so much, like even if you take out all the spiritual stuff, it triggers so much in our nervous system, which is like, what your soul uses to interface with the physical. It can just cause, if you want to be neutral about it, can just cause a lot of energy and reaction. But just stepping back, the power. So at the same time of like sexuality, I mean, obviously a big part, it's meant to make babies at some level. But yet I find that I really think sexuality it's not just that. There's so many more things. So like you in the space you're in, especially working with women, where do you find is the balance between like the literally creative aspect of that and then just the other aspects of what the sexual experience can be, and like, that relates to spirituality, whatever.
Just so I understand your question.
Yeah, I did that. I'd asked that question super well.
So you're asking where people who are coming specifically into my space find a balance between creativity and sexual expression.
Let me walk that back and ask that in a more coherent form.
Yeah. I just want to answer that.
No, that was on me, not you. Not even in just the space you're in, but just picking honeybees mind. How do you find the balance between the aspect of sexuality that is the creative, like in the sense of making babies, and everything else
in the sense of making babies is the creative? Okay, so
like
the balance
literally
between
the propagating thing, and then just
primal propagation.
Sure.
Okay.
And then like all the other aspects of the human experience that sexuality can relate to.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, you have your hormones. You have that following your cycle, following as you go through ovulation, that luteal phase, menstruation, and following how you feel in your body and that horniness as you are like ovulating and that juiciness. But then also your sexual energy being your most potent and powerful energy. When you're in that ovulating phase, you tend to be super energetic. And when you can express yourself and explore radical self-expression, especially when that ties to what makes you feel juicy and exciting, however that looks, like you can become juicy and excited just from dancing. It doesn't actually have to be the act of sex, but that can tie back to your sexual energy. Tie back to you just expressing yourself and being in tune with your body. Tapping into somatics and how you feel in your body.
Yes, we talked about somatics a lot on the show. Continue, sorry.
Yeah, so there is a balance, and everyone finds that differently as well. Whether they're acting in that primal, in that hormonal, or if it's in that creative, explorative, figuring things out, what feels good, what am I, when I tune in, what is fun and juicy, and going through those cycles. There's a lot of balance, and I think everyone finds it differently. For me, diving into dancing and movement is a creative expression and outlet that doesn't have to do with actually having sex, but ties deeply into my sexual energy and self-expression.
I'm somewhat reminded of like one of the places where we met, which was at a really awesome event through Fate Club, a friend of the show who runs that. You did the most incredible like lyra like performance like that, and it was very juicy, and it was very sexual, and it was very just athletic, and it was very artistic. And it's so sad that sexuality is, well, we could say sad, or we can just acknowledge that it is a repressed thing, because it's not just like your sexual energy within you is not just what happens, behind closed doors with, whoever you're interested in and, in fun times. It comes out, and it is your creative energy, and like in the non, baby making sense of the word. Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you a question before we do more dive into Tantra, and you maybe already kind of answered it. But okay, what would you say in both a spiritual sense and in just like the human experience sense are like the different elements or aspects of the sexual energy? There's the creative, there's what would you say are the different aspects of sexuality?
The different aspects of sexuality. That is a great question.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, you're good. I'm like leaning into this question, and I feel honestly limited in my own experience to truly speak on this.
It's okay.
No, yeah, like we talked about hormones, we talked about creativity.
So it's like your body, it's your creativeness, it's kind of like
that
your physicality in a lot of ways.
Yeah, you
too.
have that mind, body, spiritual connection into embodiment. You have that creative energy. You have that playful curiosity and what feels good and what feels right. You have that pleasure. You have that primal.
And there's also that element of kind of like that intimacy with the other person.
Connection.
Yeah,
to
like
self, connection with others.
would you be comfortable talking more about that, like the element of like the connecting with others? Because you think about in some ways, like my limited understanding of Tantra is it's like that, like the two becoming one kind of thing, like that's something we miss too.
Yeah, and modern day Tantra focuses a lot more on that connection aspect and a lot more on that aspect. So Tantra, rolling it back.
Oh, and feel free to just start diving into it.
That thread, that connection. So, yeah. Remind me the question.
No problem. Well, I was just wondering what your take on the element of sexuality that was like connection.
Yeah. Pardon my brain fart here.
No worries,
the element of connection in Tantra. So dropping and connecting with ourself, connecting with your energy, moving your energy, and then dropping in with another person. Because at the end of the day, we are all, in Tantra, there's this belief that we're all part of this all. That we're all part of this, whether you call it the fabric of consciousness, whatever you call it the all, we're all part of this kind of one. So you say that one God.
Yeah.
If we're the creators of our own, this is maybe my own beliefs, but if
we're
the creators of our own
beliefs.
universe and we are our own gods, as we connect and become one, we're still just part of that all and that one. And so that deepening and connection with another person, that melting with another person, when you have sex with someone else, your body chemistry changes. Mm-hmm. You change chemically as an individual through that connection. And that in itself is so powerful.
I mean, I think of like, intimate moments I've had, and it's like during the experience or after you notice you're breathing the same, you're like literally your breath is matching each other. I've thought of so many times where it's like there's like a telepathic kind of thing. It's like you just know kind of what the other person wants. And
have you ever dove into more telepathy and diving in with partners into light mind reading or...
I haven't been so privileged yet, but I'm interested. We did a little, but it just didn't get there yet. But anyway, I loved what you were saying about that, like that oneness, because you think about the human experience is so largely defined by the ego. And the ego, of course, is a sense of separation from other people. And I think one of the things that's so beloved of the sexual act and is so spiritual about it is like for fucking once that melts away and people like you get these connections.
As long as you're acting in sex in that way.
Yes. Oh, well,
many people
let's be honest,
can still act from that ego and have sex as a finishing, a release under their own pleasure, under their own just ego experience.
So it's more like a potential,
But when you drop in and do have that connection with someone and do have that letdown to really melt in, to have that give, that take, to dive into worshiping and being worshipped and allowing yourself to be worshipped and giving presence and giving your energy, taking energy, that give, that take again.
Yeah.
To just become connected.
Now, I think from there, I would love to say, tell us more about what, Tantra is. Like, how would you define it? Like, what is the modern expression of it? Please.
So, Tantra is a religious, spiritual practice with ancient rites and rituals, and practices that has continued into modern times. And in modern Tantra, we want to pay homage to how vast Tantra is as like it is a whole religion. There is a lot of aspects to it. Modern Tantra tends to take that approach from connection, from diving into embodiment with oneself, someone's somatics and how you feel in your body and your expression, how you connect with other people, your energy movement, and dropping into that sense of sexuality or sexual energy that many other practices shut out because, as we talked about, Tantra is one of those few that continue to have that. So modern, there's a lot of misconceptions. People always think sexuality with Tantra, and there's so many, just like Christianity, how there's so many different like sects of Christianity.
Yeah, exactly.
There's the same with Tantra. So not all Tantra is sexual. And so that is like a thing that, as I am like to just call it in, I'm a white woman in my 20s talking about Tantra. Modern Tantra pays homage, but also we have to like acknowledge is to some extent very different than Tantra in its original texts and form, and really is focusing on this radical change into being embodied in our sexuality and sex not being shamed and sex not just for reproduction as it once was.
Exactly.
Before we had this religious push shaming that, and it's just kind of bringing that back and bringing us back into our bodies.
And that's how you would say is like your experience of like the modern forms of Tantra.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm so glad you brought it up, because I think classically, people think of Tantra, they think like tantric sex, they think that, and that is an element of it. But people forget or are just totally unaware, like, oh yeah, I mean, it's Tantra is not yoga, but it's like just like yoga is more than just hatha and stretching. It's this whole set of vehicles to raise our consciousness. And I once had Tantra put to me as Tantra is the belief that that divinity can be found in the physical.
Divinity can be found in absolutely anything.
Yes.
You can find divinity and sacred. You can find brushing your teeth a sacred act. That is a ritual. That is something that you do that is a consistent ritual. And you can tie that down to your sexual energy even. And eating is a very sacred act that we do. When you take it and treat it with that sense of divinity, have you ever just been so hungry? And
yes.
You feel like you're on an episode of Naked and Afraid and you're like, oh, I really need some protein. And and then you finally get that bite and it tastes like the best thing you've ever eaten. I think the best spice is hunger, but and it feels magical. You maybe get those goosebumps. It feels divine. It feels connected. In that moment, you're connecting with your energy. You're connecting with your body. You're connecting with how that makes you feel. That is part of Tantra.
You know, something I've talked about on the show a lot, and like I'm hoping to actually study like academically is my dream, but is I'm trying to like define spirituality. And really what I find, think of the word spiritual, you think of the word spirit. And fans of the show probably have heard my spiel before, but you said you didn't know anything, so I'll say it again. So, you think of spirit, it comes from the Latin for breath, and they talk about that, and it's breathing. But like really, when you use the word spirit in English, you mean like a ghost, the character of something, or the living elements of us. And that's, to me, anything is spiritual if it really brings you close to your sense of life. And that's why I truly believe human beings are just innately spiritual beings. You don't have to be like put in a box where it's like, oh, I do yoga, or oh, I'm really into Christianity or Islam, or oh, I practice Tantra. We have these experiences that just draw us so close to our living source. And I love how you brought up like, yes, like you give a man food who hasn't eaten for 3 days, and that's the best, cracker he's ever had. Like he saw God in a cracker, and it's just, and my understanding with Tantra is we're trying to embody ourselves so much that we either like become divine or we sense the divine. Would you say that's kind of true?
I think in many people's interpretations and experiences, that can absolutely be true. Excellent.
So what kind of practices is your experiences like modern Tantra do? Like what do you actually do,
It can be breath work, movement. We've talked a little bit about somatics. And so
you're doing wonderful, by the way. I hope you know that.
Thank you. With somatics, kind of checking in that awareness to your body and how you feel in your body, that connection with yourself and your energy, moving your energy, connection with another person, their energy, moving energy together, and dropping in that existence together, diving into worshiping, self-worship, giving worship to another, allowing yourself to drop into receiving worship. There are many different ways that we can practice Tantra and take form, and in modern Tantra, those tend to be the most common.
Okay. Yeah. You know, it's so interesting because you use the word worship, which is something I had heard in tantric circles. And you think about like people who are like the modern spiritual, and that word worship or sacred, those don't come up as much. Those are more like often relegated to like more commonly like religious people. Like they think the word
Tantra is a religion.
Yes. Well, when I say that, I mean more like, you know, Christians or like that kind of thing.
Yes. And in worship, when we're diving into Tantra, it's that worship of that energy, that worshiping of your energy, worshiping another's energy, but ultimately understanding that we're all part of this great all. So worship to another is still worshiping the all. And
you kind of see like the divinity, which is, you could use the word God, or you could use the word the universe or the self in the other that's the same as in me through the practice.
Yes, absolutely.
And in some ways, sexuality maybe is one of the most heightened experiences of that. Would you say that's...
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. And so what I love about that, and I would love to introduce back into the spiritual community, is like, you know, and when I say spiritual, I mean like, you know, Western American, like spiritual but not religious. You know, so many people have like, understandably, have rejected like the more traditional religions where like words and feelings such as like sacredness or holiness or worship are a lot more common in like a church than in like, you know, maybe like a meditation group or like a, you know, a study group.
A lot of people have religious trauma, and so hearing those words bring up an experience that they're trying to move past. And that doesn't
100%.
mean that they can't still be spiritual, but they're moving past their experience of how they were raised, which might have been under Christian, Jewish, like whatever someone's religion that or experience surrounding religion was. Those words might bring back something that they don't want to go back to.
100%. And in just like if you think back to kind of the more unfortunate earlier parts of the conversation, the same thing with their sexualities. But what I love and what I think is it's important is to still realize that like 100%, you know, you can still be spiritual without, you know, your practice or your belief system having to touch those energies. But it's so sad that they've been sullied because the element in your consciousness of like the feeling of something that's sacred or the act of like worship, it's such a potent form of our spiritual expression. And it would be so good if they could be healed and if they could be understood without the dogmas or the, you know, whether it's an unconscious reason consciousness got that way or if it was more strategic, probably a mix of both.
The thing that I've really found with modern Tantra that has made it more accessible to people who are leaving past religious experiences is that in modern Tantra, we don't really tie a ton of dogma to it.
Dogma, yeah.
With modern Tantra, modern tantric practitioners kind of release a lot of that dogma and allow, similar to Wicca or paganism, a lot more of kind of this choose your own adventure. What fits for you and what feels right for you is part of your path and what is right for you. And fantastic. Love that for you. And modern Tantra generally doesn't try to push you into something that doesn't feel right, that a lot of people have in dogma of other religions.
I think when you talk about like, you know, this evolution from people, from the culture, or many people in the culture are like traditionally religious and like, you know, the traditional sense to like this growing group of people that are more like now spiritual and like, you know, with all the modern connotations of it, is I think so many people, because I do think in a traditional religion being like the main ones, there are definitely people who are having a lot of spiritual experience. But I think where we're going and what we want is the freedom to have that spiritual experience, which can happen in everything, as a tantric practitioner might say, but without the dogma of being told, this is how you do it, this is why, don't wonder why. And I think that's probably a big reason of why, in addition to like, the religious traumas, that's a big reason is people want their agency back.
Yeah, I implore skepticism. I implore
How modern of you.
Allow yourself to be skeptic. Allow yourself to be curious. You don't just have to blindly believe. Drop in and see what feels good for you as you connect with yourself, with your body, with others, as you connect to the experience. If something doesn't sit right, great. That doesn't have to be for you. Or maybe practice, try again, try in a different setting. Not everything has to be that blind belief. And that can be really healing and really liberating to be a kind of choose your own what feels right and fits for you.
Not to mention that there are so many different forms of spiritual expression and practice. I'd have to think, God, the universe, what we're going to call it, is kind of intelligence. Realize not everything is for everyone. And something that you said, it really reminded me of one of my favorite Buddhist teachings, where the Buddha, he said, listen, don't just believe me because you think I'm special. When the Buddha, if I remember kind of how he said it, because he had this very repeat yourself kind of way of talking, he said, if the Buddha gives you a teaching, try it, reason with it, explore it. If you find it to be good, it improves your life, brings you happiness and joy, accept it. If the Buddha gives you another teaching and you try it, you reason with it, you live with it, and you find it is not good, it does not bring me joy, it does not bring me happiness, discard that one and keep the other. And I love that, that's something that's happening in spirituality. I do sincerely hope we can find that in our sexual expression too, because, we wanted to talk a little bit about embodiment. And, while there are the aspects of sexuality that is it can be a very spiritual experience, or it can be because I want to have a family. It can also just be, it gets you into the body, and it touches into energies that are sexual and are also just juicy, like you were saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And being in your body is a powerful and juicy thing. A lot of times we disassociate in our day-to-day just to kind of get through the rigmarole.
Oh, the meme of I'm just going to go disassociate in a Target,
Answering your emails, sending out text messages, doing all of the things. We sometimes just disconnect from our body, disconnect from the experience to just kind of get through it. And when we stop and find that little specialness of it, make it a little bit more of an adventure, a little bit more in our body, in our experience, and what feels good, we can find that juiciness. We can find that fun in absolutely anything.
I love your answers, and in addition to being very insightful, you're just very cute about how you say it. Now, one of the last questions I wanted to touch on was, we were talking about embodiment, and, because not only are you disconnecting from your body, what I think we don't often realize is that when we disconnect from our body, so often we're really disconnecting from our spirit. So how do you see the intersection of embodiment, spirituality, and sexuality?
I see it
I'm
as
so sorry to keep giving you these big open-ended questions.
No, I see it as something that's important. I see it as something that we need to take more intention into dropping into with ourselves and what that means and looks like for us. Taking that moment to step away and feel into our body and our experience and what feels good for us in that moment. Dropping into our sexual energy, our creative energy, our most potent energy, and tying that into whatever it is that you're doing, and allowing yourself to feel into what feels good, and not just blocking you, but of course taking into consideration all that's around you. And you can tie your sexual energy into everything. You can tie that embodiment into everything, and taking those little moments to just exist and be in the moment. Putting your phone down and just looking up when you're walking, taking in how beautiful the trees are, taking in just the smell of the fresh air, taking that one little moment to just be.
I think what so many people don't realize is that when you don't fully embody, and this is totally me speaking about my own experience. To go the opposite is that as you embody, as you get your spirit, your living essence into your physical vessel, and you realize that there's different types of energy within you. 2, you realize that for better or worse, for reasons that were maybe your own karma, for reasons that are just the repressions, strategic or otherwise, of our society, there are energies within you that you don't even realize are restricted. And as you get in touch with somatics, you can actually even feel it.
Yeah.
And that it really is a spiritual experience to have that awareness in the body and to see where the faucet is like not on full blast, and just start opening it up.
As we go through life, we experience trauma in various ways. Whether we remember it or not, our body holds on to it. Our body remembers it. And when we become embodied, when we connect with our energy, when we move our energy, we can feel where things are maybe a little bit blocked, stuck, sticky, disconnected. And we can start to put in the work and intention, sending love to that part of our body, sending our energy there, focusing on what we can do to release that, to, as you said, open that faucet a little bit more, to just let it flow more. And it's an ongoing process. Like, we might feel, wow, my heart chakra is so open today. And a week later, there might be something stuck in there. And that's okay. Part of that is checking in. What maybe made you feel that way? What is something that needs to be healed? Or what can we do to help clear it and become embodied and open up these channels in ourselves? And what I love about modern Tantra, especially looking at it from that lens of, I guess we're saying traditional religions as well, is in modern Tantra, as you say, our multiple energies, we identify that shadow self, that we identify the parts of ourselves we maybe don't like as much, or we want to hide, or those parts of ourselves, and we integrate them in. Yeah,
you got to find those faucets.
And
I like
you
the faucet idea.
integrate them in, and that is a part of you that you can just acknowledge that exists. In a lot of these traditional religions, it's something that you need to like pray away, that you need to confess, that you need to like, out, demon.
Admit it's dirty already,
it's
you know?
dirty, it's wrong, it's bad, rather than it's a part of you and we can work on that, but it's still a part of you, and that's okay, because we're human, and human is not perfect, and that's part of the beauty of it.
And there's just nothing wrong with being human, and you know, you need to be responsible, which is what I want to end on, but it's just like, you know what I want people to know is that, like, you know, as you learn those energies, even if you just learn, okay, this is a restricted energy, but as you feel into those energies, you know, when you say those energies, I mean, like, you know, that you could just easily say that's you, you know, even if you just harmonize with like, hey, it's restricted today, sometimes it feels so good just to admit, oh yeah, I don't feel very loving right now, and I'm not like, oh thank God, I don't have to keep hiding it, you know. But the last thing I'd love to touch on, and not to end on like a bad note, but just to be, if you could give any advice for how people can embody themselves, or even consider approaching a tantric practice, or even just like try to free their sexuality, their sexual selves, their sensual selves, but they could do it like in a way that is responsible, safe, you know, that leads to the best results. What advice would you have for our audience?
Dive into a book, dive into a podcast, dive into an info video. But we also have this era with the internet of so much information. Look at it like with a lens and take it in. Not everything has to be for you. Dive in so wherever you're located. Find your community. There is a community almost everywhere, and you can find other people, other practitioners. But don't just see them as a guru and divine, they know all. Again, look at it with a lens and continue as you grow and learn and take in as many experiences. Drop in with yourself. Take that moment. Dropping into Tantra and exploring it can be as simple as just finding the little things special and sacred. Just looking with that lens of a little bit more special, looking at that lens of connecting with yourself and your experience, connecting with someone else. All day long, I love to, so all day long.
I can see your heart continuously coming out.
We might be around people all day long, but how often is it that we are seeing others, being seen ourselves? Take that little moment and practice Tantra when you go and just check out of somewhere and the person's checking you out. Just look at their eyes, give gratitude, match their gaze just for a moment. Take a nice breath, feel how that feels in your body, and then go back to your day. Take that little moment. Find it in the little things, and then if you want to continue to explore, do that. Find ways to just take that time for you. That would be my best advice.
That was very good advice. And just, I think something that I just want to, before we wrap up, that I just want to reiterate that really I think is important. And, I think it's both you were saying, to check in with yourself, what feels good, what doesn't. And just to speak, I think it's also very important, and something, I had to learn in life, is to not get so excited with the things that are good to you, to also be checking in with, hey, is this actually, if it's with someone else, is that like with them as well? Is
Absolutely.
This something that's good for them? Because sometimes we do things that we probably shouldn't have, whether that's we are the act or we let it, or So we got to just to be mindful of other people is important as well.
Being conscious of yourself and your energy and the energy of those around you.
Well, HoneyBee, before we wrap up, I just want to ask, is there anything else, before you plug your shit, if there's anything else that you wanted to speak from your heart for our guest, or if you feel like kind of complete? And feel free, the stage is yours. Anything you want to share?
Oh my goodness. So honestly, I'd love to get to know you a little bit more. So you shared a little bit about your belief with spirituality, this concept of that you believe in like one God. What kind of got you into doing this podcast? Like, you have this whole exploration of spirituality. I want to hear a little bit about what got you into this, and we can talk about how you got onto the spiritual path.
Oh, you're sweet. This interview might run a little longer if we're going to talk about me. I really think that, personally, I believe that human beings run on universals. I think that, and this is an idea I've had for a long time, that, not everyone's exactly the same, but there's like this sort of collection of things that make up the human experience. And we're all on these spectrums, and we find different expressions of the same thing. Essentially to say human beings are more similar than they are dissimilar,
Oh, there's this modern concept of being unique and being different. And I feel like that is just a kind of a form that just isolates us more.
Mm-hmm. And I recall that I grew up and I was in Catholic school, I'm an Italian boy, so of course. And I remember, like, as I was going through it, my grandfather had passed away. My mom got really into what you'd now call New Age, with some of the people like Brian Weiss, Michael Newton, other like life between life types authors. And I remember integrating that. And I just remember thinking like, hey, they're kind of telling me that like Catholicism specifically or Christianity is like the only thing. But that didn't make any sense to me, because if like Jesus said, God is within me, that means anyone who earnestly seeks the divine within themselves is going to find it. And so I remember I went into studying religions because I was so fascinated by it that I was like, I went in with that. There's a very common spiritual belief that like, oh, they're all saying the same thing. And frankly, I read a lot of scripture and stuff, and frankly, no, they're not. They are saying different things. But then I went even further and I was like, wait a minute. As you understand it at a different level, they are. So then I was, okay, so is it filming again? Yeah. Okay. Technical difficulties. Remember, phone chargers are important when you're filming on a phone. To just summarize what I was going to tell you, Miss HoneyBee, is that I really just wanted to understand not only myself, but why there were different spiritual expressions on the planet, and to understand both the commonalities, because then you understand God. But I've been developing this theory that like also to understand the misconceptions that led us in a bunch of different ways. And I think going back to our earlier talk about sexuality, I think that's also understanding the misconceptions of like where we got it wrong because we were young and naive as a spiritual people that got us where we are. Because as we understand those, we can get past them.
That's powerful.
Well, thank you, Miss HoneyBee.
I hope that your path continues as you continue in this podcast and explore deeper.
Yeah, and at the University of Virginia, hopefully I'll be studying my master's degree for something like this, and then eventually a PhD. With all that in mind, Miss HoneyBee, let's wrap it up there, and we'd love to have you on again. But now is your time to plug your shit. Please tell our audience how they can find you.
Well, it's been lovely joining and chatting with you today.
Well, you were lovely as well.
Thank you. You can find me on Instagram or FET at Lil Honeybee Buzz. That's LIL Honeybee Buzz. I am the co-founder of Temple. We're a femme-empowered community surrounding women's education, growth, and their path to healing. And as a practitioner, I love connecting with others, and I've been so happy to connect with you today. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. And if anyone is interested in connecting with some of the practitioners, this is for Chicago-based people. It's been beautiful to have you on, and that'll be it for today.
Thank you for watching, and have a great day, all.
Yes. Subscribe. Oh, you were excellent.